Okay. I don't know where the record went. I really want to record this, but it went away. Give me one more minute to try to make this record because I don't know. Okay, I guess it's recording because it says pause recording and stop recording. So we'll try. I didn't hit the same button I hit last time. So if your sound is on, please mute yourself. Mute. You can tell you're muted because there's a red line through the little microphone on the side. I'm going to mute you right now so we don't have any background sound. There is a way, I think, if you created a profile that you can always set it to mute yourself when you join in, just like you can set it to start on video or not start on video. So if you can figure out how to do that, that would be great. So if people come in late, then we don't have to hear lots of banging around. So I made a boo-boo. I thought that today's class was Piero Della Franchesca, and it's not. It was supposed to be Eric Fischel, but I don't have that class ready, and I looked at it wrong thinking it was this class. So we're just going to switch them. Next week I'll do the Eric Fischel class. And this week we'll do Piero Della Franchesca and Graham Nickson. So if you looked at the website and you got to Piero Della Franchesca and Titian, the first thing you should see is this page with some information about these two gentlemen. Piero Della Franchesca was born in 1420, so we're talking early side of the Renaissance. This is someone who came before Michelangelo and Tintoretto, and they looked at him for answers. He was looking at Rome for answers, and this is, he had a good career, a good life. He never married. He made a pretty good living. His family made a good living. He painted nobles. He painted for the churches. He didn't marry, he didn't have children, and he didn't have assistants either. So this is someone up to 17 years to finish a commission kind of deal. He was working all on his own, looking at other influences from the past, looking at Florence, Rome, perspective, and thinking about math within his work. So if you have a math brain, this one is for you. He's also one of the ones that was an extraordinary colorist. And he is someone that Tintoretto, who we talked about last week, really looked at him for his color. So this is the beginning of the Renaissance. This is, you know, the birth that we're talking about here, where things start shifting. We're adding so much more dimension to our paintings. They start adding perspective. It's not as flat of an image, but they hadn't quite figured out perspective yet, and so it's moving over to that world, and they're dealing with the illusion of depth and how to create perspective, and then using grids and using sacred geometry within the work as an extra layers upon layers. So in those days, art wasn't just for, it started to become more about the narrative and how you can work extra layers of things into the narrative. So it's not just a picture of Jesus, it's a picture of Jesus that is along the golden ratio, which replicates nature and how we grow and how everything in the universe grows. So it's sort of adding to the narrative and showing that you know math, showing that you know composition, showing that you know perspective, showing that you know the stories of the Bible, and putting that all together to create these narratives. So that's what they were doing. That's specifically what he was doing. Then we have 500 years later, Graham Nickson. I didn't put what year he was born, but I think he's 73 right now. So you can tell me. He's 73 or 74 years old. He was born Noel Green, not Noel King. I don't know where I did Noel King. Did I do that twice wrong? I think it's Noel Green. England. He studied at the Camberwell School of Arts and then the Royal College of Art, and then he won the Rome Prize. And if you read through this, this is a story that he told me. He worked and traveled and exhibited, he was in Rome, and he went to go to the Rome to 2 years to Rome, and he had his car, everything was robbed out of his car, all of his art supplies, or all of his paintings were robbed. So he, you know, quickly made the decision to go up onto the roof and just deal with what he had and paint the sunset. And that became something that he did for 2 years, painting sunsets and sunrises without missing a day. For 2 years, he did this. So, you know, sometimes tragic things, I think it's a great example of something tragic happening. His stuff, all of his paintings were stolen. And so, you know, he made the most of it. And out of that came a series that he is very famous for now. You can look at the series of the sunrise and sunset watercolors. But this is also someone who looks at Titian, who learned sacred geometry from Ewan Uglow, who also looked at Titian. And these are people who employ geometry in their composition. Graham Nickson currently lives and works in New York City. He is the dean of the New York Studio School, along with as the head teacher. He is my mentor. He is the man that I studied under for 2 years, and I continue to work with him. If you really want to work with Graham and me, you can. We're going to teach a class together in New York in the last 2 weeks of June. So if you want any information on that, it's an outdoor painting class, which takes place in it's called Arbor Vitae, and it takes place, I can't even think of it right now, like an hour out of the city. We drive out of the city in a bus every day and go paint in the landscape with Graham, and then we come home. Okay, so if you want any information on that, you can email me. The second thing I put on the website was this sheet that I've used in class before, which describes what the heck is the golden ratio. So the golden ratio is a sequence of numbers called the Fibonacci numbers that work together in this beautiful symbiotic way in which your rectangle and your square can break up smaller and smaller and smaller into perfect ratios, which then, if you do it correctly, will create sort of a spiral throughout as the squares and rectangles get smaller and smaller and smaller. So that's what you're looking at here. Some of these Fibonacci numbers, it has to be these specific numbers. You cannot make a golden ratio without the actual ratio numbers. You can find the numbers by doing mathematical equations. Don't ask me how. I am not good at this. I prefer just to use the Fibonacci numbers. And so if I want to make my paper the size of a rectangle, I'll just find a paper that's 21 inches long or cut it to 21 inches long by 13 or 8 or whatever, rather than trying to do math equations. But there are many ways to find the golden ratio besides using just Fibonacci numbers. So basically, we're thinking about different ways to grid our preliminary composition and how we're going to use that grid to help enforce the narrative that we're talking about in these paintings. So lots of people did it. Da Vinci did it right here. He has, this is actually on the golden ratio, and you can see that this line right here probably lines up perfectly with one of these lines, and it's always a little bit longer rectangle than the regular paper that we get. So if you want to do sacred geometry paintings or sacred geometry compositions on paper, you have to cut your paper or tape off your paper or grid your paper or stretch your own canvas. So someday maybe I'll be creating an entrepreneurial business on selling canvases and notepads on the sacred geometry size. That would be really great. Anyone want to go into business? Let me know. Okay, just kidding. I'm probably actually not going to do that, but someone should. Okay, so I could only find the PDF version of my file today. I don't know why, of my PowerPoint. So here we are, Piero Della Franchesca and Graham Nickson. This is the baptism of Christ. This painting is, if you watch the video that I posted on Piero Della Franchesca, it's an hour-long video about this painting and all that he was thinking about during this painting. I don't have an hour to talk about all that we need to talk about in this painting, but there's a few things that you can know just by looking at this painting. And if you were to draw imaginary lines where you thought things connected, you would see there's a line right down the middle. Everything lines up down the middle of the painting. You have the dove, you have the baptism, he's pouring the water on top of Jesus, which is going straight down his face. And then look, the water, his hands are put together perfectly right down. Jesus is going right through the middle of the canvas. That's line number one. Line number two, you can look right through this dove and see that it's making a cross now. Through the composition, there's a secret cross, right? So this is another way you add narrative. People ask me, why would you do this? Why would you add this to your painting? Why not just make a painting for the sake of making a painting? But in the Renaissance days, they were thinking about it's the birth of education, of math, of art. And so you have to consider that they're trying to put all these things together to say, hey, I know all these things, and I use these things to enforce my narrative within the painting. So then you have repeating forms. We have repeating long parallels here. And we also know this shape is a irregular shape because it was painted. It's actually in a church building, sort of, I think it's in a church in Venice. And it's in a weird sort of frame, but this is a circle, right? You see a big circle right here within a square. And the length of the rectangle completely is a golden rectangle. So let's take a look at the grid that we think he may have used. So you can see we have perfect squares, perfect circles, and if you think back to the Romans and their architecture, archways were very important, leading to heaven. That's sort of creating depths of space. You'll have archways, archways, archways all the way back. And so archways are made of, this looks like an archway in its own, it's a half circle, right? So we have a long half circle. So this in itself looks like an archway, which is something they employ a lot when they are talking about composition, because circles and squares, if you think about any church you go to and how they use, also some of them are built on the golden ratio, some of them use these geometric figures within the churches, within composition. So it's all building upon building. So it's like saying, hey, I have all this information, I'm so smart, and I'm going to use it within my painting. So instead of just making a painting, you're going to say, hey, I'm also a scientist, I'm also a mathematician, I'm going to add layers of that in. I'm also a botanist, I'm going to add layers of that in. I'm also a foodie, I'm going to add layers of that in. So it's giving the viewer more to look at, it's giving more narrative of these layers that they're putting in. There's different mysterious things happening within the composition. And that just makes it more interesting. You can look at a painting like this for a lot longer than you can look at a painting that isn't having all these sort of secret things underlying it. So you can make any grid on your paper before you start painting. I like to do diagonals, maybe even a X across my page so that it's going from one corner to the other, one corner to the other. You can do it that way. You could do circles, you can do squares, you can do the golden ratio, golden rectangle. So here's one. Flatulation of Christ. This is a very weird and mysterious painting. Oh wait, one more thing. This was painted with tempera, which is pigment, ground up pigment, and egg white. And I'm gonna just play this on mute while we do this so that you can see while I keep going. So I'm going to put it in the corner here. And you're going to see him grind up the paint. And so this is the, oh, actually, I guess he already did it. He's talking about, let me just see right here. Okay, so if you're reading the Victoria Finlay book with us, this is lapis lazuli. the blue stone that came from the mines of Afghanistan, and then he grinds it up and mixes it with the egg whites. So that's what he did to make the tempera paint. You'd say that's mica. He ground it up to get the greens. I think that's what he says. But in a second, he starts grinding it up. So this video is fascinating. It's a BBC video that is on our website. And you're going to see him grind up the paint here in a second. So I'll just leave that up while, I wish I could, there he is. So he's ground up the powder, and now he's going to mix in the egg whites. So it's just sort of fascinating to watch, because if you're adding if you take extra classes with me, and if you have looked on the resource page, this book is the book that we're using to learn about color. So if you want to learn about color with us, this is the history of color, and I use this a lot as reference. Although, I'm sorry, landscape class, I forgot to talk about blue when we were at the ocean. So the next color we're going to learn is green, so you can read along with us, or just know when I'm referencing color, that's what I'm talking about. So I just wanted to show that part, because it's really amazing to see them grind up paint. And you can still do that. You can buy your powder at the grocery store, at Blick, pure colored powder, and some of them are synthetic, some of them are stone, and then mix it with oil. You'll get oil paint. Mix it with egg white, you get tempera. Mix it with water and guar gum, you get watercolor. Okay, moving on to this painting here. This mysterious and strange painting. First thing that you can see and notice is that there is a larger square within a long rectangle. So what does that tell us? That tells us that it's on the golden rectangle. It's on the golden mean. It's on the golden ratio. He's using that longer rectangle that's on the Fibonacci numbers, and then he's broken it down and found a large square and a smaller rectangle, and within that smaller rectangle, there's another square of these three men. You can see it by the horizon of the building behind. So we have this foreground image of these three men who are completely ignoring what's going on back here. We have Pontius Pilate and the whipping happening over here, and they're up in the front foreground acting as if nothing's happening. So there's a lot of narrative happening within this painting. We have references of architecture. We have an underlying grid, which you can see in the ceiling. So a lot of times in class, I'm saying, hey, get to the ceiling. Hey, get to the floor. Hey, get to those corners. Look at Piero Della Franchesca's corners. Look at this. And even this diagonal of a roof, which you may think is not important, leads us right to this guy right here, which gets us into the painting. Look at this right here. Beautiful corner over here. Nothing is left unthought. And the grid in the ground helps us create perspective, because he's got it large to small going back. So that's something they were learning, how to make things that are further away look like they're further away on a two-dimensional surface, how to make the ceiling look like it's getting closer to you as it moves forward, and also employing these grids throughout. So let's take a look at what they think the grid, and these are art historians who thought this up, not me. They think this is the underlying grid that he used. So you could see the large rectangle, smaller square within it, smaller squares within it. So even if you're working on a golden ratio, you don't have to put the spiral. You could then put diagonals, you could put a whole bunch of squares, you could grid it out however you want once you've gotten yourself a golden rectangle. Again, architecture. Our faces, Mona Lisa, all of these things work on the golden ratio. Take a look at a snail, take a look at a succulent, take a look at a cabbage, take a look at a lot of flowers. They grow along these lines. Like I was saying, you can have grids within grids. You can break up, you can put multiple long golden ratio rectangles within rectangles. You could break up those thirds and use them in different ways. I'm not sure I completely understand what they think is going on here, but maybe you've studied this painting more. The thing about Piero Della Franchesca is he was a little bit ignored in modern times, because his work wasn't in galleries, it wasn't in museums, it was in churches. And you had to specifically go seek out a painting and look at it. And you still do, you gotta go to Italy. But they've also moved a lot of those out into museums now, and you can go to the Met and you can go all over the place and see these in larger museums. But for a while, he was a little bit forgotten, which to me is sad because he's sort of, you know, Michelangelo gets all the credit, but he learned a lot from Titian. So here we go, a snail. This is a Da Vinci, but I just want throw these in for fun so that you can see that Piero is not the only artist doing this. There's a whole lot of artists, including a lot of modern artists, and that's where we come to Graham Nickson, who is employing golden ratio or geometry in some way. And you can see if you look at these two paintings side by side, and you know that Graham was looking at Piero Della Franchesca, these horizon lines and the most important figure line up, and there's an underlying cross within them. So there's sort of a broken grid of 4 sections, 1, 2, 3, 4. Graham, so this painting is tempera, and this painting by Graham Nickson is acrylic. For those of you who are worried about oil paint, you can try tempera. You can, if you want an opaque medium, you can try acrylic. I didn't believe that this was acrylic until I saw it in person, and I could really see the more like a little bit of plasticness that acrylic has over oil paint. But, and people say you can't get your colors as vibrant in acrylic, but if you look at Graham Nickson's paintings, especially in person, they are neon colored. They are so bright. So this was just another thing that I found. If you look at this painting right here, there is this bending figure taking off his shirt, and he's either, maybe it's Jesus before the baptism getting ready, or maybe it's him putting his shirt back on after. So another, you know, mysterious moment of layering. And then you can see that in one of Graham's paintings that he is referencing Piero Della Franchesca in his painting by mimicking a figure. So a lot of times contemporary artists will take a Tintoretto or a Titian or a Michelangelo, and they'll look at the figures and the way they're turning and twisting, and they'll copy one of the figures and put it into their new composition. So that in its own way is saying, I'm referencing art history, I studied art history, and I understand what Piero Della Franchesca is doing, and you know, I can do his style in a contemporary way. So I don't consider this, I consider this smart. I consider this, I learned from the masters, I studied the masters, here's a secret moment. If you're smart enough to catch on to what I'm doing here, then you get it too, right? So that's the fun of art history, is we get to play this little game and see like, oh, who was referencing who was looking at who was using what they taught us 500, 600 years ago in their work. Another golden rectangle. I already talked about this painting up here, but actually that one was a little zoomed out, and now I can see a little more of the ground here. And you can see in this one by Graham Nickson that there are subtle rectangles being broken down just by the forms. The figures are really used as markers, as placement pieces to help you get through the geometry. So this is a rectangle broken down into a square. This is, you can see that he's added a whole nother canvas onto this piece. I also want you to think about the fact that this painting is probably 30 feet long and 15 feet high. These paintings are massive, and he painted, I'm sure he probably painted one of these panels first and then said, oh, I need to keep working on my composition, and added, you can see the seam right here. He added a whole nother panel and added to the painting. I'm always trying to get people to think about that too. You don't have to just be a slave to your rectangle. You know, you can expand your rectangle, you can crop your rectangle. You don't always have to add paper or add a canvas. Sometimes you need to cut your canvas in half, or cut your paper down a little bit, or cut off some of the horizon or some of the bottom of the paper. But he's laced in other interesting secrets within these paintings. If you look at the magazine over the figure, it's kind of interesting that it's a portrait on the magazine or book that he's reading of another artist. I think it's it's probably an artist that he loves. I don't know that painting specifically, but he's referencing yet another artist within his painting. He's referencing math within his painting. He does mathematic equations to break down the grids in certain ways and find these different subtle horizon lines, you know, like all the waists line up, or all the reason they're holding up this towel is not because of they're holding up a towel, it's because it's breaking the rectangle in a way, and it's creating another line, a horizontal line. Even these spires in the back, or those towers, those are lines. So you've seen he's broken this down into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe even 7 different long sections. And he's done that here too in this painting. There's 7 figures. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 figures in Graham Nickson's piece and 8 figures in Piero Della Franchesca's. All you can consider a standing figure is a horizontal line. You can consider a column. It can be a horizontal line that helps you make that grid. You could use a column, a tower, a human, a telephone pole, a trash can. If you're in my landscape class, we drew a lot of trash cans this last week. Because they were this beautiful blue trash can. And again, other ways, if you think about Tintoretto last week and those red robes and how the color was pulling us through the image, you can see the same thing. And he learned that trick from Piero Della Franchesca. Next one. So again, we have on the left side this shell and this egg on a string, which references fertility. But again, it makes a beautiful line right down the center of her, down the center of her hands, and right to baby Jesus right here. And then we have, he's employed other methods of using architecture to create depth in the space. There's the archway again. There's the columns, which help us. These archways help us get right down to the figure and to the story that's down here, to the people that are down here. Even, you know, the diagonal of this stick, and he's pointing, and they're pointing their fingers here. So there's a lot of layers to these paintings. It's not just a simple thing. That's why there's hour-long lectures on one painting, because you've got to break this thing down. And there's a lot of narratives. There's not one narrative. Yes, it's a painting of the Virgin and Jesus, but it's also about these other people. There's weird facial expressions. They're holding books that represent that they're scholars, or crosses that represent that they're friars, or I don't know what the stick is for, but there's all kinds of things. I don't even know, but you could, some of you have probably seen some of these in person. And again, composition carried through by the color. And then we can move right over to Graham Nickson and see that he's broken this one down into another, he split it here, and he's used the birds, the shadows a lot of times are what carries lines through his images. The breakdown of how he saw the water as green, then blue, then sky. And then Mr. Alligator here is creating a nice long line for us. Really fun, more playful, not religious pieces of work, but these are about color. These are about composition through geometry, and how you can find smaller squares and rectangles, how you can create subtle lines. So he didn't draw, you know, an actual grid and leave it for us to see. He drew a subtle grid by placing the things in the composition to reflect the geometry. So you could try that at home if you're an artist, or even if you're in the landscape. You know, you can take a piece of you can put a tree and move it over here so it lines up with your grid. You can use the bird that you see out in the landscape, but then put it where you need it to mark a corner or something that helps you build your composition on a more mathematical equation. This one's more about diagonals, so you can see that he's created diagonals subtly by There's, again, right in the middle, we have Jesus, and then there's more subtle breakdowns. There's a line here, so this one's sort of broken down into 9 squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We think that this one right here is a self-portrait. He has his eyes closed. We don't really know how old he is, and we aren't 100% sure that that is a self-portrait, but it is known to be. But again, you can see how he's put these figures on certain diagonals. You could even find a diamond within this one. Look at the way these legs and this body is at a weird diagonal, and this body is bending, and the legs are doing that, and it makes a diamond inside the rectangle. Or you could see a diagonal this way from corner to corner, like a big X. Same thing with this one. You can find a big X in this one. It's pretty easy to see because there's a big beach lifeguard stand. So he's used the models holding towels. He's got the models bending in geometric poses. He's got this chair right here for a reason. There's nothing in this painting, in either of these paintings, that are just fra-la-la, oh, I felt like putting it in. Nope. We're talking about serious painters. Oh my gosh, I'm way over time. I'm just dawdling away talking about, I could talk about these two forever. But here's a couple more. Again, you can see how it's broken down. You can see how so if you consider the figure as more of a tool that is part of your composition rather than the be-all, end-all of your composition, and I have to talk about this all the time in life drawing, you know, it is about the figures, but you do want them to have a composition and a space that helps you actually get to the figure and see the figure and know that the figure is the important part. So this is the zoomed out painting. If you need to leave, feel free to check on out because it's 9:32, but I'm going to just keep going to the end. I think I have 2 more images left. So you can see that these are really very geometric, very broken down in different ways. He's used lightning. He's used road, you know, like the tracks that the cars have driven on, chairs in this case. So everything can be part of your grid. In one of my classes, we went to the museum, the painting museum in Balboa Park, and we held our golden rectangle grid out at looking at the paintings and trying to find which ones had golden ratio, and we found a lot of the paintings, especially the older, I don't know if they were Norwegian paintings, but a lot of the landscape paintings, and a lot of them are using the columns and the arches, and in the more modern times he's using surfboards and towels and chairs. So he's keeping it contemporary while using very old methods to create his compositions. Graham Nickson. And then this one, if you've taken any art history classes, you've probably seen all of these paintings before. But again, we have, look at the grid, underlying grid that he's created with the material. And again, we have a diamond shape being created by the angles of their legs coming towards. We even have complementary colors being used. Look at red, green, bouncing back and forth, bouncing back and forth. In the middle, we have our very important blue. Okay, so that was the end of Graham Nickson and Piero Della Franchesca. If you really loved this lesson, I think I sent you a grid or a golden rectangle where you could copy it and make your own golden rectangle drawing. And I'm going to post a few on the comment section from the museum class we had. Oh, this is still going. Oops. Pause that. Where is it? Oh, also this, just in case anyone's going to Pasadena, Extraordinary California Woman Show. That looks exciting. But here, I sent you this, and then I sent you a different grid. And then under comments, I'm going to post a few of the student images. But this video right here is the hour-long video that is about the baptism of Christ painting. Very fascinating. And this is a really quick 5-minute video that everyone should watch. You know, Graham is shy. He doesn't like to be on TV. He doesn't like videos. He doesn't like cameras at all. He's a very shy man. It was a hard time finding video of him. So this summer when I go visit him, I'm going to try and interview him and at least get him to talk about a few of these things on camera and see if we can maybe put something together specifically for this lesson. But you can see more of their work here, and also Graham Nickson's work was, a lot of it was purchased by the Louis Dreyfus, who recently passed away a couple years ago, and that collection, a lot of these paintings are now in public. They are being shown in buildings all over the Upper East Side. So if you're going to New York, his work is also collected, or England, all over, collections all over the world. So if you want to see some of these works, I'm going to repost the new video. This was the old video. And that's all I have. If you have, make a golden rectangle painting, or if you have a comment about math or how other ways to find golden ratio, or any tricks for you math and science people who can help me out, feel free to help me improve this lesson, because like I said, numbers and math are not my thing. And again, I apologize for switching up the lessons. That was completely my error. And next week we will do the one that is listed on 228, Eric Fischel, and okay, it doesn't say, I can't even read it all. So that's all I have to say. Any questions? So go over to the comments today and check out the images that I'm going to post from our class. And if it was yours, I don't know whose were whose, feel free to say, hey, number 3 was mine, or that picture was mine, so we can give you credit. Okay, thanks everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you.
Thanks.